Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for being here. I have spent the last few days thinking about some of the lessons that I have learned as a parent. And I think one of the hardest lessons that I've been able to learn is realizing how my words have affected my kids. And I don't know why, honestly, it took me so long to learn this lesson because I can still remember things that my parents and other people said either to me or about me when I was growing up that hurt. Because words, no matter who is speaking them, have a way of sticking with us, don't they? So it brings up a lot of emotions for me when I realize that I have also said things to my kids that they remember as hurtful, even when I never would have intended them to land that way. When we speak and yell and react and even joke around, our children aren't just listening to what we say, they're listening for what our words mean. So, today I want to talk about one of the messages that we can accidentally communicate as parents, even when our intentions are good, and that is shame. Not because I think parents are out there trying to shame their children. I actually don't believe that at all. In fact, I think the opposite is mostly true. Most of us are trying to teach responsibility and kindness and honesty and respect. We're trying to just raise good people. But sometimes, without realizing it, what our children hear isn't, I made a mistake or I did something bad. It's, I am bad. There must be something wrong with me. And those are two very different messages. Now, the good news is that difference and start to understand it, we can change the conversation and be more intentional with the messages our children take away from the interactions they have with us. When we hear the word shame, we tend to go straight to humiliation or embarrassment. Maybe someone being publicly criticized or made to feel small around other people. But shame is actually much deeper than that. At its core, shame is an identity message. It's the difference between saying, I did something wrong, and believing that something is wrong with me. All right. Now, that distinction might sound subtle, but for a child, it's enormous. And even as an adult, I feel really strong emotions, even when I say that out loud, that something is wrong with me. Okay. We know that our children's brains are developing and they're forming their sense of self. Now, this is ongoing even from infancy all the way through adolescence and into adulthood. Their brains are constantly collecting information about who they are, and much of that information comes from the people that they trust the most. They don't have decades of experience to balance out one hard moment. Okay. They don't have the perspective to think, oh, mom's really frustrated. It's probably been a hard day for her. Or dad didn't really mean that. He's just projecting. So when they're corrected, they're not just hearing the words, they're trying to answer that deeper question. Is this telling me what I did or who I am? And that's what's important. We can communicate shame without ever intending to. Now, most parents aren't trying to make their kids feel bad about themselves. They're trying to stop a behavior or teach a lesson or prepare their child for the real world. The intention is often love, but children don't learn from intentions. They learn from what we actually say and the message or the meaning that they take away from it. And that's why this conversation matters. I'm not trying to eliminate correction or consequences or accountability. Children need all of those things. We're simply learning to separate behavior from identity. So our children can take responsibility for what they've done without questioning who they are. This sense of shame isn't created in one single interaction. It's built over time through small messages that get repeated over and over again. All right. So let me give you some examples of what this looks like. Imagine that your child forgets their homework. You could say, looks like you forgot your homework today. Or you could say, you're so irresponsible. One describes what happened, the other describes who they are. Or maybe your child lies because they're afraid of getting in trouble. We could say, that wasn't honest. Or we could say, you're a liar. Again, one speaks to the behavior and the other assigns an identity. Okay. Now, those examples might seem extreme, and maybe that's not exactly the language that you would use, but hopefully you get my point. Sometimes these messages sound like, you're so dramatic. Why do you have to be so difficult? Stop being so lazy. You're too sensitive. These kinds of statements often come out in moments of frustration. We don't stop and think, I'm about to give my child an identity. We say what comes naturally, even if it's language that we grew up hearing ourselves. But children don't hear those statements as passing comments. They file them away as evidence. Maybe I really am the difficult one. Maybe I am lazy. Maybe this is just who I am. Now, the interesting thing here is that we do the exact opposite when we want to encourage our kids. We tell them, "You're such a good helper. You're so kind. You're a hard worker," right? We understand that positive labels shape identity. We hope they'll see themselves that way. But the same is true of the negative labels that we assign to. Whether we're building them up or tearing them down, we're always communicating something about who they are. It's why it's important to ask ourselves, am I talking about my child's behavior or am I talking about my child? Because behavior can change, but identity is much harder to unlearn. So, why does this happen? Especially if we have our own feelings of shame that we're holding on to from our own childhood. Well, parenting has a way of bringing those old scripts to the surface. We often talk to our kids the same way that we were spoken to. Many of us grew up hearing phrases like, "Stop being so dramatic. Don't be so sensitive. What's wrong with you? You're embarrassing me." And now, years later, those same phrases can slip out of our mouths before we even have a chance to think about it. That's one of the reasons awareness is so important. When we notice those moments, we have an opportunity to pause and ask ourselves, is this really the message I want to pass on? It doesn't mean we have to reject our parents. It just means that we can recognize that they were parenting with the tools they had and also decide that our children can experience something different. That's not betrayal, that's growth. And I think that's what generational healing really looks like and why it's so beautiful. It's not pretending the past didn't happen and not blaming the people who came before us. It's just simply noticing what we've inherited, keeping what is serving us, and letting go of what isn't. I think it's important to acknowledge here that some parents worry that if we stop using strong language, our children won't take responsibility for their actions. This is actually a really common fear with a lot of parents that I work with. But accountability and shame are not the same thing. In fact, shame actually gets in the way of accountability. Think about your own life for just a second. When someone attacks your character, what's your first instinct? It's to defend yourself, to explain, to justify, or maybe it's to shut down or give in to self pity. Very few of us become more open to feedback when we feel like our worth or value is in question. Children aren't any different. When a child believes, "I'm bad," it's much harder for them to admit that they made a bad choice. Because if every mistake confirms something is wrong with them, they're naturally going to want to protect themselves. But when a child knows, "I'm loved, I'm safe, and my worth isn't up for debate," they have much more freedom to say, "Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't have done that." That's the kind of accountability we're really after. It's not compliance that's driven by fear, but responsibility that's rooted in security. Now, that doesn't mean we avoid consequences or pretend harmful behavior didn't happen. It also doesn't mean that we lower our expectations. What it means is that we stay focused on the behavior we're trying to teach instead of assigning an identity that our kids might carry with them long after the moment has passed. Because the goal isn't simply to change what our children do, it's to help them become people who believe they're capable of doing better. The truth is, we're all going to accidentally communicate shame at some point. We all say things we wish we could take back. We all react instead of respond. We all let our own stress and exhaustion and old patterns speak louder than our values. That doesn't make us bad parents. It just makes us human and we make mistakes. What matters is that those moments don't have to be the end of the story. One of the most powerful things we can do when this happens is repair. We can go back to our child and say, "Hey, I was really frustrated and I let that come out in the way I talked to you, and I'm so sorry. We still need to talk about what happened, but I want to do it differently." Do you know what that teaches? It teaches that mistakes don't define us, not theirs and not ours either. Remember, our children are constantly asking, is this telling me what I did or who I am? Imagine if over and over and over again, the answer that they received to that question was, "You made a mistake. We'll help you make it right. And we can learn from this together." Nothing about this changes who you are or how deeply you are loved. That is the kind of message children deserve to carry with them. And it's the message we deserve to carry with us as well, because mistakes should never determine our worth. Now, as you go through this week, I want you to notice something. I don't want you to get hung up on every word you say or every decision you make. I just want you to think about the messages that might be taken from the things that you say. So the next time your child makes a mistake and you find yourself responding, pause for just a second and ask yourself, am I talking about what they did or am I talking about who they are? And that one question has the power to change the whole conversation. And if you realize there are moments when your words communicated something different, remember that your relationship isn't built on one conversation. It's built on thousands of them. Children are remarkably resilient, and one of the greatest gifts we can offer them isn't perfection, it's repair. Okay? So keep showing up, keep noticing, keep learning, because every time you choose awareness and intention over autopilot, you're changing the story that your child will tell about themselves and believe about who they are. Have a wonderful week, everyone. I want to let you know that starting next week, new full episodes will be released on Tuesdays instead of Fridays. So, a little change in the schedule moving forward. I will see you all on Tuesday, and we will continue to explore the art and science of parenting and put your parenting to the test. Take care, everyone.